Who Palantir is has always been hard to understand. We're going to take a dive into that today, though. We're going to cover exactly who Palantir is, what they offer to the market, and some of the weird statements on social media that have really started to captivate the general narrative about Palantir's abilities and data engineering abilities, or what's possible in technology, right? The surveillance state that might be forming in your country or the United States in general can be considered very real. And I want to start to address that. I want to speak from a data engineering, software architecture point of view about what is unfolding, and we can cover this together. If you haven't already liked and subscribed to the video or to the channel, please do that. Like this video, share this video, subscribe, go to hit that button to stay up to date with the notifications. But let's get into it. Let's talk about why Palantir is not tracking every American. And I believe the real story is scarier. The data engineering reading of this is going to talk about the federal footprint that is being laden in 2026. We're going to specifically talk about what is deployed, what is hype, and talk about what is to watch coming up. If, like I said, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do. I am just starting out, just getting a chance to share these ideas. I'm a software engineer and architect working for over 15 years. I'm just getting a chance to start expressing these ideas on a larger stage. So the viral claim that is going around on social media, I'm sure you're seeing, Palantir, and how they track every American today, and how they have this huge database, or they're building a huge database to track everyone, and that they're looking to take over the government. I believe that collapses into three different things. What the platform really is, what I will go over, that it is a data integration and analytics tool, and it is not built out currently to be a surveillance camera or phone tap. We'll go into what is contractually deployed today. I'll cover a little historic detail for you there. We'll talk about the agency by agency, contract by contract, operational situations, and the other stuff that's very much fantasy and still being built out today, as well as the executive branch policies that have been pushed to enable companies like Palantir and give them a foothold on the evolving markets of artificial intelligence for everyone. In general, the host, or the honest read here, is that they are not really a finished panopticon in general, right? And I love that word for this specific need, which is that in general, it is still an integration level vendor, and they have a deliberate agency by agency data fusion project whose stated political goal is actually the kind of cross agency dossier that privacy advocates have feared for decades, right? So you're thinking back to Orwellian states of government and things that would enable that, right? So the infrastructure is being built. I want to be clear. The infrastructure for this is being built. The legal guardrails are being actively contested, and the data engineering hurdles of monitoring all this stuff are very real. And it's slowing that project, but it is not by any means stopping it. So let's talk about what Palantir really sells, right? Palantir is not a surveillance company. They are in the consumer space. And it does, as a company, they do not tap phones themselves, run cameras, or sell personal data, right? They sell their products in two core products in general, the most famous, but they have a platform or a plethora of things they're going to be developing and still working on and adding as features to these platforms. So the two products you may have heard of at this point, Gotham and Foundry. Okay, so Gotham, originally built for the intelligence community and focused on investigative case building, link analysis, tactical decision support. So think here, connecting the dots between known suspects in a case like CSI or your favorite cop show, right? Foundry is more for, let's say, the business side. It's data integration and analytics, and the customer brings their own data. Foundry presents a unified view over Palantir's ontology, right? Their business methodology, what they're working with. That's physically a semantic layer. They work through objects, links, and actions. And I'm going to give you a visual of this. So if you're kind of like, hey, Ernest, what the heck are you talking about? I'm going to give you a visual. Palantir's own filings here do discuss that they do not own, control, or sell the data their customers integrate into the platform. The customers own that platform or the data. They retain the ownership of that data. They control all the decisions about that data. Foundry runs inside that customer controlled environment. So if you're engineer, architect, software work, you're quite familiar with what I'm saying. But if you're not familiar, hopefully that kind of explains that they are very careful about who they say owns the data and who controls it from a Palantir point of view. Excuse me while I'm taking drinks here. So let's get into that visual real quick. Let me put this in front of you. If you're on screen now, just want you to check this out. This is the overall understanding of what is occurring with their ontology at Palantir, right? So you have this smart data map here that kind of discusses what they're doing in general. The people data is being tied together with different objects so that they can understand who are in those places. And then they're tying those with actions of those people and then tying those in with places, right? And so all of that data, think of it like a master map, and it shows that information is connected. That's one of the hardest things about data and architecting in general, is that data is messy. It's hard to be able to put together and make work. But this is supposed to be what is offered through that particular data map. There is physically no data copying, as you can see in step 2 here. Data stays put in the original box, right? There's a virtual table that is placed on top of that, like a window that lets you work and see where that data is. The compute, or the thinking, basically is done at the data. That makes sense, right? So the visual you're watching there. And then, of course, a big change to that, a key implication, is that there's no giant warehouse actually needed. There's no database needed to be built to build this thing that I think is being referred to in social media. Foundry, the product, sits all over separate data boxes and makes them look and work like one single database. This connects everything, right? So specifically, like what's been speculated, but also looked at, like police data, tax data, other information in general. Master key concern here is that Palantir claim they don't own that data, but they often have the only master password or a skeleton key to access it for support and control. This is a big worry, in my opinion, when you talk about or label freedom for Americans and American businesses in general. So let's go from here to explaining that ontology, just again, topically, that it is that architectural layer. It sits on top of the data itself. It is not the data, and it is not essentially the application, but it is the way that the application would work from anybody's point of view if it sits on top of it. Why this matters for privacy is more important here, because whether a federated query is functionally equivalent to the master database, for the person whose records are being joined, the question of governance and access, not storage, right? Palantir's "we don't own the customer" data claim is legally accurate, but technically incomplete. In practice, the engineers from Palantir retain administrative access for support and operations in most government deployments. The civil liberties concern is rarely about how Palantir as a data broker, but it's about how they're the only vendor with that skeleton key. And so what is actually deployed is going to be an interesting place for us to pick up here. Excuse me while I'm drinking. The DoD represents Palantir's largest, most operational footprint by standards here, as you can see on the table I'm providing. There's the Army Maven Smart System. There's the DoD-wide Project Maven. That's a ceiling cap on what to be spent. There's the Titan Ground Station, the Army Enterprise Service Agreement, which is really just like a shopping arrangement for a long period of time. And then, of course, the Foundry adoption from the Navy Ship OS. And just behind me, you'll get a glimpse here on the status of those situations. So operational at CENTCOM from the Army Maven Smart System, or MSS, operational and mixed from the DoD Project Maven, awarded prototyping for the Titan Ground Station, partially operational for the Army Enterprise Service Agreement. Again, that's like a window of time, multi-year situation to just kind of go shopping. And then Navy Ship OS is another awarded situation for Palantir at this point. So The Army's $10 billion 10-year vehicle is the most structurally important number. It's not just a single project. It is a procurement scaffold giving Palantir 15 prime roles and 60 subcontractor positions to deploy Foundry across nearly every Army mission area without re-procuring. So that signals institutional commitment. We are no longer in a Palantir phase with those experiments, right? We are very much moving into these are going to be part of how these American institutions are run. So, what is actually deployed? Let's cover immigration enforcement because this is a hot topic. Immigration enforcement is the most politically visible and it's the most documented, clearly. So, this is where real time migrant tracking headlines are coming from. The ICE analytical platform has been extended as a particular project. If you're looking here over these numbers, right, $88 million originally, plus a $50 million extension September through the September 2025. That's a foundational enforcement analytics contract extended as Palantir's role has deepened. Immigration OS Elite, the name of this is, I think, is a moniker, $30 million award in April 2025, which was intended to ingest data across DHS components and likely DOJ shared data to support enforcement targeting. Palantir's role in actual deportation operations has been documented. So this is stuff that clearly been deployed. It's out. It's in the wild, as they would say. Civilian agencies, let's go ahead and cover this, right? This is the contested frontier where people's public data is becoming more accessible, where the political project meets the legal limits, and where the gap here is already deployed and headed in a direction that could be catastrophic without the proper regulation. So in the IRS alone, there's been this talk of a mega API being built out, where Palantir engineers are describing with congressional correspondence as embedded at the IRS and building a unified hub for IRS taxpayer data. According to Senator Wyden and Representative Ocasio-Cortez, they sent a formal oversight letter on June 17th, 2025, treating the taxpayer records database as an established fact and expressing concern about onward data sharing. It has an ongoing agreement where Foundry has underpinned a project since the pandemic and remains in active use today. Specific 2025 to 2026 new awards are not fully public, but reporting confirms ongoing work. When it comes to the SSA or Social Security Administration and Department of Education, not quite yet deployed, but in active negotiations to adopt Foundry, not yet confirmed as operationally deployed. Right. So this distinction between fully integrated and headed in that direction is exactly where most viral coverage is wrong in factual data here. So what is not evidenced yet, right? Let's be clear about that. There's no primary source documentation today that shows any of these three very specific areas. So there's no unified DOGE Palantir database joining IRS data, Social Security Administration data, HHS, DHS, anything. There's no database right now that has been documented anywhere with the steps that would normally be taken or even abnormally be taken to give us proof. There doesn't appear to be any evidence for a real-time tracking layer covering 330 million US residents at this point. And there's no evidence of a published system of record or a computer matching agreement covering such a merged system. We're gonna go over these in a visual as well, because you might be asking, what is a SORN, what is a CMA, and why would those be considered so important in not having evidence about this being done yet? And of course, on screen, I'm providing what Palantir has provided as their denial of a database that's built on these particular elements as well. Right. So here in my very visual demonstrations in our talks all the time. So what is a SORN or a CMA? Explain on the 7th grade level. So in our first box on the top left, you'll see a public announcement, like a legal sign for the people that says we're doing something as a government with data and different information that will be collected about Americans. So, who is in the system, what information is collected, why they need it, and what rights would be associated with such a thing. So, a school analogy here is that the tardy folder sign, right? The office is creating a digital folder for you being tardy, right? They would put a sign up that says that, because treating you under that particular umbrella without giving you a notice would be catastrophic for many reasons, right? Number two, that CMA, or the computer matching agreement, is a data sharing contract, right? It says that if you're going to merge data from the tax agency and the health agency, you have to make sure there's a strict legal binding contract between two or more parties and the systems there, and it sets hard boundaries about what they can compare with the information. So it prevents automatic spying in that particular situation. The school analogy here for you would be that a library and cafeteria decide to share information. Doing so, they would have to be a very specific document that expresses what will happen and how it will occur. Why this matters for the merge systems is because, in general, advanced software systems link together, act as a super view of the information, even if the data is not copied. And you can't do that quietly, according to our laws and our regulations, right? So a SORN or SORN and a CMA must be signed or taken care of. So the SORN is the announcement that something is going to occur, and then a CMA is basically that agreement about what will actually occur. So all up to this point, it's just speculation, right? All up to this point, the conversation coming around social media on different videos around what is happening with Palantir and how they're merging our data and what they're going to do with that information, that is just speculation, right? It's not anybody who's provided data specifically, just mostly the negotiations. But we can assume that there are negotiations happening around that, right? Let's move on here. The DOGE cross agency data situation. And I know this is kind of hard to see. I apologize. The slides here came out a little crazy. DOGE in general, when we're talking, is that everyone is trying to say that DOGE was really the reason of having that particular merging point. Here, it didn't actually, it's not going to occur that way, because fundamentally, you need a couple of things to actually get us there. There's a legal hook that's part of that. There's the integration that's part of that, and the conduit. And again, I know these are hard to see on this slide. Apologies. I should have picked a better theme for this particular presentation. But this is three elements of any cross data agency merge that we just addressed from the CMA and the SORN that would have to be signed for us to get in a legal position to even be hearing about a particular database that's actually being created. So there's legal opposition that's happening. I talked about this earlier, but the legal opposition that's occurring says that no agency has published a system of records notice describing any unified DOGE Palantir cross agency system, and that Epic's legal filings explicitly allege that DOGE has already forced agencies to systematically violate the Privacy Act. While that is maybe substantially true, we have particular safeguards in the processes that I've talked about with you, that even if they had the data, they would not be able to proceed with any particular motion because of the technicalities that I've talked about here that are required to be filled out so you can physically move on to the next steps. And if they're not done, you like the segmented way that we have the government set up, it just prevents that. Right. So here's the data engineering reality check here. Problem one is that there's an entity resolution issue. Linking one person's data across all of those particular data sets and doing so without a universal ID is notoriously difficult, even inside those organizations. Right. And I'm speaking from personal experience, being somebody who's worked with the government in a couple of those organizations. Working inside one of their data sets is impossible because they don't have a universal ID. Then trying to tie those across all of those particular organizations is probably the biggest reason why it just won't happen, even for artificial intelligence. Then there's the data quality problem, right? So the raw information and data there is not a problem. It is very much the issue there that consistency is always going to be required to be done through ambiguous matching, right? Poor data quality is the reason that these source systems have to be managed by entire data engineering teams, architectural teams, and data science teams as well, right? That is why those folks have jobs. In problem number 3 here, there's governance, right? Every comparable project has failed, not because technology couldn't move the information, but because the legal model was brittle or the governance was weak and the source data was dirty, right? This pattern has repeated itself across dozens of countries. It will continue to repeat itself because humans are flawed. We don't do things in a way that always makes sense. And data and managing enterprise data is very much a generational job, especially if that company survives over time. Here is a slide that talks about the 1% error rate and what that means for linking Americans incorrectly inside of any of these systems, right? So if you incorrectly link people, which it will inevitably happen, here's what happens as a result of that. The research says that healthcare multi-source linkage has shown that there will be a specific probability of folks who are just not linked because the data is so dirty. So they'll be missed or have even unfavorable conditions because of that. Federal statistic agencies have said a few tenths of a percent is the only acceptable range of failure when it comes to not linking a person, right? So here's an example, though, that 1% error rate on the 333 Americans, that would mean 3 million people plus are incorrectly aligned in the system somehow. That's the optimistic estimate, right? That's if we felt we were that close to being right. Also, that means that's roughly 5 terabytes worth of data a day for those 3 million Americans, which the volume is not a problem. We process that much easier than ever before now. So the volume is not a problem. The quality is a problem at that volume. So even modern Kafka or Flink clusters can sustain tens of millions of events per second. Raw throughput is not the problem. Correctness, lineage, and consent are the problems, right? So here's a historical body count when we talk about projects that have failed, right? Every viral panic about coming surveillance state should be read on this list, not because the technology couldn't move the data again, but because governance failed. FBI virtual case file called Sentinel, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on this. They canceled entirely because Sentinel was partially delivered, and the root causes there were that the requirements drifted over time. That happens on so many projects. And there were so many technical complexities, although the optimism was just like, yeah, we're going to get this done, even though there was weak user involvement on the project. That is all documented as a taxpaying citizen. So I pulled this through research and understanding of kind of like what could happen, right? Healthcare.gov launched in 2013. If you're older than 10 years old, you should be aware of what this is. It was required that this would be launched, and it required the IRS, the SSA, so Social Security Administration, and the insurer system, right? Huge system of different companies that have to play ball correctly. This website crashed weeks after it launched. And the root cause here was that it was a fragmented contractor responsibility. Nobody knew what they were supposed to be doing. And late end-to-end testing, rigid political deadlines, it just did not go well, right? So for the first couple of months, actually, it was very poorly organized. The UK NHS care.data was a centralized data project that was abandoned entirely. The root cause is that the stakeholders here completely failed to engage on it. The opt-out confusion of being involved or not for citizens, and the lack of transparency with the public, right? All of that kind of stuff led to having a horribly managed project that just did not get launched well. And then lastly, here is an example: Australian robo-debt matched tax debt to welfare records, and of 567,000 debts raised, about 470,000 were falsely raised. So 80% of the entire match was false. The math here was just incorrect. That was one of the root causes. It was ruled unlawful, and it was part of a royal commission. So the warning for any system operating at this scale is that you'll be facing these same particular problems on a national basis in the modern society. Specifically, is the warning, right? We just talked about that. Read that carefully, take a screenshot here. If you have not already liked this video, subscribe to my channel by now. Please help me out, help me grow, share this video. Please go to the link, also share this so we can get the word out about how this is happening across the world and the country. Australia's robo-debt system match annual tax income again, 80% incorrect, did not work at all. The wrongness was not the bug. At this scale, the wrongness became the policy. So it obviously just wasn't going to work long term. What would it actually take, right? If you're saying, Ernest, talk to me about what it would actually take to do this if they're planning on it, and I'm sure they are. But what would it actually take to make this happen, and why it won't happen? Let's say that. So for this to happen, you would need resolution at scale, right? A single canonical entity resolution service with a published situation of error rates being less than 1% at population scale. Right now, that's never happened. So there's no operational system that could do that. And then schema harmonization, right? We talked about why putting the data together is just so difficult across so many different organizations, so many different states, so many different unemployment systems, and you expect them to speak to each other, right? That is not going to happen. And then unified permissions and auditing, right? A consistent access control and audit model spanning every agency's separate statutory authority without violating any of them. Good luck. If you're a lawyer who watches the channel, thank you so much. Drop a comment, let me know. Do you think that's possible in realistic standards? I don't think it's possible. And then you have 4, where a governance regime that survives court. So ultimately, you would need, for instance, Foundry's ontology to be good modeling decisions over already linked data. And it doesn't magically do that and solve it. It has upstream linkage and documentation and reasons and stuff, or otherwise you have a legal problem. That's just as simple as that in real terms. So I want to give a shout out to all the folks who work in the legal field who are helping defend us against the world of leaders who want us to move directly into this, right? So here are the laws that are standing in the way. Aside from the Privacy Act of 1974, which says that you must have SORNs, that routine use limits and computer matching rules. The Computer Matching Act itself of 1988, the IRC 6103, 42 1306, and the HIPAA privacy rule itself, FERPA, the student record consent and your personal identifiable information, and DPPA, your DMV data, or the private right of action work in general, right? So there's to get across this field, this is what it means to be a data architect or working in the legal and compliance field, that you have to consider these things when you're working on projects or large implementations. So is Palantir capable essentially of being able to defeat this at where they are? Even as an investor, as a person who looks at investing, not that I have any stock in Palantir, by the way, I would never assume that Palantir could do this. This is astronomical, right? So what can the executive orders really do and what can they not do? We have a bunch that say some things, but in general, the real legal action here is that it is still up to the courts to decide, and that litigation is challenging whether the EO can be implemented or not, and whether routine SORNs can be stretched to cover what amounts to general cross-agency dossier building work. So the EOs may have weight because of the political times, but we still have laws. So a lot of that you'll have to wait to see if it actually develops even further. So again, here's the honest assessment. Let's do a review of where does this put us when we talk about ultimately the claim that Palantir is tracking all Americans. They have a database, they're building a database. where does that stand in the claims as we talked about this for our presentation? So Palantir's products, do they integrate across data agencies right now? Yes, that is true. That's literally the product, and it's called Foundry. And we talked about how that ontology breaks out, and you have a graph to look at it. Go back in the video and check it out. Palantir is operational in several agencies. That's true. We already went over that. The Trump administration has directed cross agency data emergency. That is true. We've already gone over that as well. Does Palantir have a specific contract to build a whole of government master database? There's no evidence for that, right? Palantir explicitly denied it. There's no public primary source. It would benefit Palantir to get that as a publicly traded company, so they wouldn't lie about it because it would help their stock go up. I can feel very reassured about that right now. DOGE has already established cross-agency data access. True, according to Epic filings, EFF, and congressional sources. And then has Palantir currently been tracking every American in real time? No. This is technically infeasible at scale. Go back to chapter 4 if you need to see my specific reasonings on why. And then, of course, the infrastructure to enable, is that being built? Yeah, that's happening. That's happening in real time. I've given you examples and projects that have occurred and ones that are currently happening and will be happening into the next couple of years. And are the legal guardrails holding? In my opinion, partially. And we have ongoing litigation, so we don't have any express opinions to be able to share about that right now, but that is what you have. Here are the milestones I would say you need to watch if you want to have evidence that these things are actually going to occur at some time. I would say until I, as Ernest, see some sort of published SORN or SORN, I do not have any particular worry that Palantir will be taking over the world. Excuse me, take a drink. The computer matching agreement as well, naming DOGE or naming Palantir, right? Those things have not happened. There is no legal authority for matching the data. And until I see these two agreements in 1 and 2, then I will have nothing to worry about, especially because when you go into number 3 and number 4, the contract explicitly scoping the cross-agency work to happen through these processes. Those have not been established. They have not been taken care of. And I don't believe that would mean they are going to be taken care of. Then you also have the IRS, SSA, or HHS privacy impact assessments that need to be updated. So once that happens, once you see that data and those regulations being updated, you could make the assumption that we are certainly headed in a time where Palantir would have much of this information accessible to them. Litigation outcomes that would be redefining from a big scope, I would say, right? So the ACLU, if we saw them taking some actually large hits in court over some of these privacy things, then we'll come and revisit this. And please, you can leave a comment and let me know how Ernest messed this particular prediction up in general. But I won't. Why do I think, or what do I think the defensible take here is, what this means, right? The lesson from what I'm trying to pass on is that as a data engineer, as an architect, as a citizen, what does this mean? Is Palantir evil? And that, is this all fine, right? I would tell you right now, that's not the lesson. Let's start there. That's not the lesson. The lesson is that a population scale cross-agency dossier is being attempted, and it is being attempted in a way that exactly is consistent with the failure modes that have killed every single project that have come before it. Every single project. So personally, as an investor, as an architect, I'm actually really disappointed because I don't see an attempt for any of the people involved to show their investors that this is going to work out, right? The schedule, pressure, there's weak governance, there's suppression and dissent that's happening already on data quality. There's contractor-led integrations that have to happen. And the assumption of all of this is that the volume and velocity are not really going to be solvable and are pretty much hard problems. They're not. They haven't been for a long time. You guys watch Netflix, you're watching YouTube right now. So the correctness, lineage, and consent are the hard problems. They are not being solved, and they are being skipped. And so we will have time to revisit and see how that worries all of us as Americans over time. But the truth here is that as we all, as Americans, have a chance to really sit back and decipher what we have learned here, I'm hoping that we all are understanding the impacts and what this means for us, right? So the honest assessment here from me is that Palantir is a bunch of products that integrate data. They are a provider of data. They've been given a heads up and a early foothold in the market on a couple of different plays that normally would not have been available to them as a company, I would say, from the tech perspective, right? So I would just say they're honestly getting an early ball advantage to play in the market and get some money to economically benefit from some things. And this goes all the way up to leadership and the folks that they still do business with in the administration, for instance. But again, not everybody will be on top forever, and not every business is actually worth the juice or the squeeze. Until next time, please drop a comment, subscribe to the channel, drop any comments about how these particular videos are doing, or if you want to see any new subjects, something covered. I'd love to write anybody back and engage on that. And I appreciate you watching. So, yeah, till next time.